Sam, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. My name's Sam. I'm a Unitarian Christian, or sometimes called a biblical Unitarian Christian. It's a little different than Unitarian Universalist, which is, something that people might have heard of, although there's a little bit of a shared history there. Professionally, I'm a statistician. I've worked in the healthcare industry and the tech industry. I have a master's degree in biostatistics and undergrad in biostatistics. And I also have a YouTube channel myself. It's called Transfigured, that sort of is focusing on theology and philosophy and science and stuff like that too. I'm a dad of 3 girls. I live in the Chicago suburbs, and I like thinking about these things. So thanks for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So could you tell me some of the reasons you believe in Unitarian and in Christianity in general? Because I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in any religious beliefs, and particularly why Unitarianism and as opposed to Trinitarianism.
Yeah, so Unitarian Christianity is, I generally think of 3 categories of reasons why I think Unitarian Christianity makes sense. One would be biblical. Obviously, somebody who doesn't believe that the Bible is the inspired scriptures wouldn't find that one as persuasive, but I think it's a better fit with the scriptures where Jesus and God are just simply different characters. I guess I should maybe just outline the theology a little bit first. For a Unitarian Christian, Jesus is just a human being. He is not a God or a member of the Godhead or something like that was up in heaven and then voluntarily incarnated himself. He's a human being. He is the Son of God. He was, specially chosen by God for the mission that he was given him, et cetera, especially empowered by the Holy Spirit to do his miracles. But the power through which he was doing what he did and teaching what he taught was a power that God had given to him. It wasn't intrinsic to him because he was God himself, something like that. And the Holy Spirit, just as another question, the Holy Spirit sort of just like God's empowering presence. It isn't like a third person of the Godhead. It's just sort of how God works in creation and specifically in human beings. And God is just one person, just God the Father. There's an interesting history of Unitarian Christianity in America. It's sort of, there was Unitarian Christianity early on in Christendom in like the first couple centuries, but it sort of got wiped out as Trinitarian Christianity sort of won the day of which version of theology got to be the theology of the Roman Empire. And then in the Protestant Reformation, Unitarian Christianity quickly came back on the scene as people were sort of reading the Bible and being like, well, if we're going to do this sola scriptura thing, what does it say about God and Jesus? Well, it doesn't really seem to teach the Trinity. It seems to teach something more like this. And there was actually like a century in Poland where Poland was ruled sort of by Unitarians from about 1550 to 1650. And it was sort of the first place in Europe where there was religious freedom and religious tolerance. And then the Catholics sort of retook over Poland, and that chased the Unitarians away. And a lot of them went to England and Amsterdam. And people like John Locke and early Enlightenment philosophers became Unitarians from that. And sort of Thomas Jefferson and a lot of the founding fathers were very influenced by John Locke. And so a very significant portion of the people, the founding fathers and the people writing the Constitution and stuff like that were actually Unitarian Christians. And it sort of kind of split into sort of liberal Unitarian Christianity, which became Unitarian Universalism, which is almost sort of like a post-religious religion, you might say. I don't mean to be unfair to them, just sort of describing it. But then there's always been sort of the more conservative, biblical, abiding strain too. And so I'm sort of from that, biblically abiding strain that believes that the Bible is the Word of God and is still a Christian religion, even though most Trinitarian Christians would think that we're heretics or apostates or something like that. So that's just sort of a brief background on what Unitarian Christianity is. I think the reasons for it, I kind of mentioned biblical. I think that, the Bible doesn't teach the Trinity. That's a later development and a later idea. I think that history also illuminates that if you want to believe in the teachings of Jesus and his apostles, well, then those teachings can't have come onto the scene 400 years afterwards, right? Jesus couldn't have taught something 400 years that came 400 years after. So there's a real historical problem, I think, for Trinitarianism. And then I would also say, philosophically speaking, I think that a lot of atheists agree with this, that when they get into debates with Christians, they're like, well, the Trinity doesn't make any sense. And there's all sorts of logical arguments that you can make against the Trinity. And then there's also the logical arguments about the incarnation. How could Jesus be fully man and fully God? Isn't that a contradiction? Doesn't have all sorts of problems? I feel like Unitarian Christianity just completely dodges all of those philosophical problems that the Trinity and the incarnation generate. So I would say those three reasons are probably the three main reasons, and especially the philosophical ones might be the ones that appeal most to an atheist.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Not having to suffer from the philosophical problems of Trinitarianism is a big advantage, I would suspect.
Although I would
difference-
suspect that even an atheist would want a religion to be in line with its own scriptures, right? If you're going to say this is the word of God, you better believe what it says, and your teachings better be in line and not in contradiction with your own holy scriptures, or else that's its own kind of problem. So even an atheist can appreciate the argument from scripture for why Unitarianism would make more sense.
Well, that one I think is more dubious because the ambiguity fallacy. People can interpret texts in any way they want, essentially, and so there are ways to interpret the text that would imply Trinitarianism, just like there's ways to interpret any text to imply anything. And so I'm not really a fan of textual arguments, because I think that because of how ambiguous they are, you can get whatever you want out of them. But I'm definitely a fan of the not having the philosophical contradictions of the Trinity. That would be a big one for sure. But what difference does it make? Who cares whether Trinitarianism or Unitarianism is true? Why does it matter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, I think one of the big differences is that if you view Jesus as a human being, as opposed to a dual nature, divine human thingamajigger, that it makes Jesus much more relatable, and it makes Jesus's example something that's much more inspiring to imitate. Right? Because if Jesus just is God walking around on earth, then it's sort of like a video game programmer who goes into his own video game and knows all the cheat codes. And so it's like, okay, well, I can't imitate that, right? If I'm a video game player, I can't imitate the video game programmer who knows all of his own cheat codes and stuff like that. But if Jesus really is a human being the same way that we are, then his example, I think, is even more inspiring and even more approachable, I would say. And I think that if I had to list the biggest reason, the biggest differentiator, the answer to the so what question, I would say that is it.
The relatability thing?
The relatability thing, yeah. And the what that means about us being able to aspire to live after his own example. Like when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, asking like, God, if it's possible, please take this cup away from me. Jesus realizes what's about to happen to him. He's so terrified that he's sweating, or he has tears of the sweat of blood. He's just like, imagine being the sort of person, like if I told you, Tom, that you could save the whole universe, you could have world peace, you could end hunger, poverty, all these things, except, oh, by the way, we are going to have to torture you. This is going to be in front of your family and followers, and you're going to have to hang on a cross, and it'll take, I don't know, 5-6 hours of you just hanging there, bleeding out, having to lift up your body to breathe by nails in your hands, right? And you're going to have to get all the way through that. But hey, if you did that, by the way, world peace, or perfect world on the other side of it. I would like to think that all of us would be like, well, I wish I could do that, but I'm not sure if I'm the sort of person that could do that, and to think of Jesus as being in exactly that situation and that he goes through with it. I think that's sort of like that moral example of a fellow human being doing that is the inspiration that I think Unitarian Christianity can have more of than a Trinitarian understanding of Jesus.
Well, there's a few things there. One is that I don't see crucifixion as actually that bad. As ways to die, it's not actually one of the worst.
Well, it's certainly not the best.
True.
I mean, yeah, I mean, could one imagine something slightly worse? Possibly. But there's also the added aspect of, oh, by the way, you'll be betrayed by one of your friends. Oh, by the way, your best friend will pretend he doesn't know who you are. Oh, by the way, your mom has to watch. Oh, by the way, you're naked. Oh, by the way, the people that are putting you to death are the very people that you're trying to help, right? Oh, by the way, you'll be put on trial and you'll be tried unjustly. You know, you haven't done anything wrong, but yet everyone will think that you're the worst criminal there is. Oh, by the way, all of your people will get given a choice between whether to release you, who's perfectly innocent, or release this awful guy, and they'll choose the awful guy instead. You know, like there are all these things about it beyond just the pain of crucifixion, like embarrassment, shame, frustration, all of those things kind of lumped into some perfectly awful mess. Could it imaginably be worse? You know, I'm not going to say my point falls apart if we couldn't imagine it being worse, but it's pretty bad.
Well, even given all of that, like I wouldn't even rate it in like the top 15% of deaths of most humans. I think most humans die more painful deaths than that in many ways. Starvation, years and years and years of depression, suicide, rape and torture. Yeah, that doesn't really seem that bad. It seems more like he had a bad weekend. Jesus had a bad weekend and
yeah, but
saved
would
the
you
universe.
voluntarily go through that when all you could need to do is skip town, right?
Well, that's another thing.
That's the part of it, is that Jesus knew what was coming and embraced it. I think that that's sort of the crux of it. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to invite people to imagine them being in that place and making that same decision.
It's possible. I'm not sure, but I know that there have been many people who have done that, and far worse. So, like, I know there's a Buddhist guy who set himself on fire with gasoline as just a protest he's not going to save the universe. He's just doing it to make a point, to try to
Right.
get people to
And lots of
understand
the
things.
Christians that came afterwards were tortured and brutalized in the Roman Empire under persecution. And some of those deaths, like being fried on like basically a giant frying pan, I don't know, that might sound worse than crucifixion, maybe. You know, being ripped apart by animals slowly, that also doesn't sound particularly fun, right? But all of them were doing that sort of in the under the inspiration of following after Jesus.
Well, I think it's a common thing that many societies, many cultures do that. It's not specifically for Jesus. It's just a thing that is ingrained in humanity, that being willing to sacrifice your life for some greater goal has some perceived moral value.
Yeah, I think that it is one of the most beautiful things about humanity, is that, you know, whether in war, right? I mean, even just going to fight in war for your own country is somewhat suicidal. You know, there's always a decent chance that you could die doing that, but yet we often honor that as one of the most brave and noble things that people can do. Or, you know, firefighters, you know, all sorts of things, right? That is one of the most beautiful things about humanity. But I think Christianity taking that and placing it right at the center as like, you know, greater love has no one than this, that a man should lay down his life for his friends. I think that has extra elevated that and given it a different sort of level of resonance and importance in basically all of human history that's come after that.
For me, I kind of see it as the opposite. I see it as, because this is something that has been ordained by the creator of the universe, the fact that he created the universe in such a way that this is a problem would be make it less meaningful. So like if he created the problem and then made something to solve it, and his means by solving it is a less than optimal sacrifice of another human being, that seems to make it less meaningful in a lot of ways. Like, for example, let's just say God didn't command Adam and Eve to not eat the apple, and just said, go ahead, have the apple. Seems like problem solved there. They have knowledge. Sure, maybe they die. They can stay in heaven and it doesn't matter anymore. Like, it seems like the whole problem is God commanded them not to do it for no valuable reason whatsoever.
Yeah, you know, I hear what you're saying. I'm not entirely sure how to respond to that. Part of me sort of, I don't know, doesn't feel like I'm of the authority to sort of question the way that God ordained things. And maybe I can understand how an atheist would find that entirely unsatisfying. But it's one of those things where I feel like, you know, whether we could imagine the world differently or not, we don't have control over that. It's sort of, we're in this world, we're in this show already. That's the one thing that we can all agree on. I feel like the question is how to respond and how to move forward from there. That's the thing that we can actually control.
Sure, I would agree, but I'd say, like, knowing that we are in this world, we should look at the different hypotheses and see which one best accommodates the data. And so when I look at like Christianity and say, like, suppose hypothetically Christianity is true, one, I don't think it fits the data, but more importantly, if it was true, it seems like the Christian God is a moral monster, not something we should worship, something we should not worship, something we should try to usurp with everything possible. Seems like most of his decisions were pretty terrible decisions that could have been improved upon. And I don't understand why there's this impetus
Well,
for people to say,
how would you
go ahead.
use imagine that the Christian God is true? How would you even usurp him?
I have no idea, but that would be irrelevant. So, like, if Hitler was the ruler of the universe, it would still be our job to try to usurp him,
Yeah,
even if
but
we were
Hitler's
unable to
an
do so.
actor within the universe that who is of a similar level of power and stuff to us, and so it's one thing to fight another agent within the universe. It's an
Well,
entirely different
that part
category
doesn't
of
matter
things.
to the analogy. So the analogy here is if Hitler was the creator of the universe, same mind, you couldn't usurp him, but it would still be our obligation to try, even though we couldn't, because he's just that bad. And so
Well,
the point
you
here is
can't
that if
try. What's the point in trying to do the impossible? I feel like let's imagine that God is evil, right? That's not that there were actually versions of Christianity early on that posited that. They posited that there was a higher God, right? But that an evil God created our world, and that then Christianity was some sort of spiritual escape plan, right? You don't overthrow the God, but you, through Jesus being some sort of spiritual messenger, kind of get around the bad God and get back up to where the good God is, right? That was Gnostic Christianity, and Marcionism basically had that as their theology, that the world was created by a bad God. But I like, so imagine barring that possibility that there's some higher spiritual realm above the bad God. What do you even do if there's a bad God? I mean, is suicide then noble? Like what exactly is the plan then?
well, I'd say it's the same thing as the Buddhist monk who sets himself on fire to try to help the world or make people recognize this is a problem, even if it's
I mean,
futile.
contagious suicide as the answer. I mean, I feel like that's the only thing that would make sense is just like some sort of self-immolating protest vote. But like, is that really sort of the moral thing that you think is the best way to live life, assuming even that we take that this world is bad? Like just some sort of, check out, pour some gasoline, light a match, and inspire as many people to follow you?
Well, it's like your question earlier. If we have a way to try to save the world, and or that way is by turning away from the giant evil God who's mass murdering people and not listening to him and doing everything we can to not allow him to use us to torture other people, then wouldn't that be the moral thing to do?
Yeah, but who, in what sense is Christianity teaching people to torture other people?
Would you like it alphabetical?
I mean, I should be clear that, Unitarian Christianity has suffered plenty of persecution at the hands of Trinitarian Christianity. But
Yes,
I would say
Christians do that a
that
lot.
Christians do that a lot. But I would also say that at their best, they don't, and they know that they shouldn't. And that I don't think that's certainly not what I'm teaching or what I'm claiming. And I feel like that Jesus's crucifixion is exactly the opposite of that, is that you let the people torture you, and through love you actually overcome and defeat them, and you overcome and defeat the desire for evil. Jesus could have been powerful enough to wipe out, annihilate, whatever, call down a legion of angels upon his persecutors, but he didn't, right? That I feel like is the message. And I think that what Christianity is saying is whatever you think of this world, however you would judge it evil or bad, although I think there are some interesting problems if we view ourselves as completely created by processes within this world, by what processes could we then judge the world as having been bad? But we could maybe circle around back to that question. I think that's an interesting question. But I feel like it is embracing the path of suffering towards glorification and the spread of love that is exactly what Jesus is teaching and inviting people to follow.
Well, sorry, I partially agree. I think that Jesus trying to sacrifice himself to save the world, that part's fine. The problem is who put the world in this place in the first place? Well, that's the God who's asking him to sacrifice himself. That's
I
the
mean,
problem.
so whatever, I mean, whether we think this world was created or not, whether we think there is a God above it or not, I think we'll agree about the state of the world. But again, the question is what should we do now? And I feel like embracing life, despite the fact that a life perfectly well lived will result in suffering, but voluntarily embracing that suffering as a message of love to your fellow man is the right answer. And that's what Jesus is showing us to do. And so, like, I mean, I don't think you need to tell Jesus about all the evil in the world. I think that he perfectly well experienced the full depth of evil in the world. But he, I mean, there's a weird sort of, I don't know exactly where this is going. There is something similar to the Buddhist monk who sets himself on fire, and Jesus voluntarily going into Jerusalem knowing full well that it's going to get him killed. There's something equally suicidal, but there is also, I feel like, a crucial difference, right? Jesus isn't going there with the goal of being killed, even though he knows that that is the logical consequence. His goal is to defeat evil and to proclaim a different message, knowing that that'll get him killed, which is similar but slightly different than setting yourself on fire.
Well, so I'm not disagreeing with that part. There's another part that I'm disagreeing with. I'm saying, yeah, you can do all of that, but also condemn God as being the moral monster that he is. So you do both. You do help humanity as much as you can and condemn God as a moral monster. That seems to be the correct path. It's you have to acknowledge that what the God did was evil and wrong, and you should not believe in him or trust in him. He is not praiseworthy, and still do things to help humanity.
All right. So I'm going to try and address that question, but I might circle around on it for a little bit. So I grew up being taught, a version of literal creationism, right, with a relatively literal interpretation of Genesis. And, go to college, like I mentioned, I studied biostatistics in undergrad. And just sort of the evidence for evolution became increasingly overwhelming. I'll put it that way, right? Whale hip bones, old fossils, genes in our DNA that are very similar to chimpanzee DNA that don't even get used. Name a whole bunch of converging lines of evidence. Slowly convinced me of that, and that was a very challenging time for my faith. So, and like I would say I got pretty close to atheism myself, kind of through that. But I feel like, I don't know, I found that there were other Christians who had already believed in evolution and found other ways of integrating this. And I think that one of the weird things that ended up happening to me through that process was I feel like evolution began to be seen more as an argument even in favor of Christianity and not just as a challenge towards something that needed to be integrated, however uncomfortably, right? And so I want to talk about that because I feel like this is something that then atheists might find persuasive, because atheists, in my opinion, or in my experience, tend to love evolution. So I would say something like an evolutionary argument for Christianity. I mean, the one sentence version would be Christianity seems to succeed in the evolutionary definition of success in terms of spreading, becoming more common, encouraging people to have larger families, encouraging people to convert to become Christians. So both through conversion and by birth, it seems to be generally good at outcompeting its competitors. And the only thing that seems to come close is Islam. And Islam is pretty darn similar to Christianity with a couple of differences. And so which one of those two things is more evolutionary successful, time will tell. But in either case, there is something about believing in God, and specifically seemingly the Christian religion, that seems to outcompete its alternatives. And so the question is why is that the case? And what does that reveal about the nature of the world that we're in? And I think that sometimes atheists fail to take evolution as seriously as they should. Because theoretically, if evolution is true, all of our moral sensibilities, all of our moral thoughts, all of our culture, all of our brain, all of our psychology is the result of evolution, which is the result of natural forces in this world. So in what possible sense, whatever, could we end up having correct moral intuitions that the world was bad if it's the world, quote unquote, or the universe or the cosmos or whatever word you prefer choosing for the whole show? In what possible sense could we judge it as evil if our moral intuitions are just the result of the whole show?
Well, the origin of our beliefs is independent from whether or not they're true. So, um, even if evolution is a random process, it could still land onto true beliefs, especially if it's selecting for truth. And so, if like I'm a moral realist, so I believe there is objective morality. Most philosophers are atheists, and most philosophers are moral realists, even though they don't believe in God. And so, there could be a different thing that grounds objective morality, and evolution can give us beliefs about those things and be right. The fact that it came about via evolution doesn't make it any more or less likely to be true than if it came about via a god. Also, to say that it's a product of material forces and things like evolution doesn't make it any less real. So even if all we are
I
is matter and
agree. For,
motion.
for the record, I agree with everything you just said. I think that's right.
Well, I'd say
But
I'm going to go a little further and say that
okay.
even if like morality is a product of matter and motion or whatever, it could still be equally as real as if it was a spiritual thing grounded in God. And so we could still have equally as objective and real beliefs of truth, beliefs of morality, even if all the naturalists are right about the world and it's just matter and motion. And there wouldn't be any advantage to having a spiritual realm or God in this context, because all of the things you want, morality, truth, meaning, etc., can all just be physical things that exist in the universe.
So then my question is if you think that the right moral answer is basically, I don't know, contagious self-suicide, I don't think that would be very evolutionarily successful over a long run, right?
Sure.
But it's literally a self-exterminating process. So, and then the people who believe in a non-self-exterminating morality will outsurvive that. So doesn't that speak to something true about the world?
I'm not sure. So, like the fact that something,
If the world if this objective truth that evolution is sort of helping us grapple towards and helping become embodied in us both psychologically and culturally, right? If there is some realm of objective moral truth, right, that has causal impact on the course of evolution, wouldn't therefore the most evolutionary successful path be the thing that's objectively true?
no, like they can be separate. So, like there are things like objective truth is a thing, but evolution doesn't always select for objective truth. We have fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, misconceptions, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that there is an objective truth out there doesn't mean that us knowing the truth in all contexts is what's
So
most evolutionary advantageous.
there's any correlation between evolutionary success and conformity to objective moral truth?
Not necessarily, no.
So they're completely uncorrelated?
They can be.
Huh. I mean, I would say it's not, I wouldn't say that evolution always causes everything to be perfectly true, right? It's sort of feeling it out and it's somewhat imperfect, but I would say it certainly strongly goes in that direction. And that is even what evolution is trying to do, is it's trying to get the perfectly morally successful thing embodied, just sort of by definition, right? What else
Yeah,
would
I'm a little
evolution be
lost.
doing?
Produce survivability. I don't think it has anything to do with trying to achieve morality or objective truth. It's just about survivability and reproductive natures
But
of.
then I noticed some people in the comment section brought up the evolution or the evolutionary argument against naturalism. That is sort of the direction I'm heading. If you don't believe that there's any correlation between evolutionary success and moral goodness from the objective realm, then how could you ever suspect that your mind, which is a product of evolution, and your cultural beliefs, et cetera, which are all products of evolution, would be able to get you there? Wouldn't you just have to be a complete and total skeptic with that regard?
No, because like evolution can give you a set of beliefs, and the one that you're most inclined to believe can be wrong, but some of the other ones could be right. And so if evolution is most inclined to give you the belief that the Rubik's Cube thing, the two squares are two different colors, I forget what it's called, it's wrong. But evolution also gives you this other intuition of logic and problem solving and scientific method that you can verify that, oh, they're actually not the same color. And so the fact that evolution can give
But
you a
why would evolution have brought into being truth seeking unless it were useful in an evolutionary Darwin sense?
truth seeking is useful?
Well, yeah, truth seeking is useful. All right, right.
Yeah.
So then, doesn't it follow from that logically then that evolution is in fact evolutionary success is correlated with objective truth?
Yes, but not objective morality. Those are two separate things.
What's the difference between objective truth and objective morality?
Well, truth is a broader concept that has correspondence to reality in any sense. Morality is a
So
particular
is
thing of
objective
reality.
morality a subset of objective truth?
Yes, everything in
Okay,
reality
but
is
then
a subset of objective truth, but not everything in reality is evolutionarily beneficial to believe it's true. So there are lots
okay,
of things. Say,
so
say atheism is true. It wouldn't necessarily be evolutionary advantageous to believe that, because having deluded beliefs can in fact cause people to act in a way that is more beneficial. And so having a true belief about this thing would not necessarily be evolutionarily advantageous. Having a false belief may be evolutionary advantageous. So even though the pursuit of truth is selected for because it helps, that doesn't mean having true beliefs in every case is going to be evolutionary advantageous. That's why type 1 and type 2 fallacies exist, or type 1 and type 2 errors. If you hear rustle in the bushes and you think it's a lion, you run away every time, even though most likely it's the wind. And so it's an evolutionarily advantageous false belief, even though you have a desire to
yeah,
pursue
but it's
truth.
also, yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I'm not saying evolution immediately produces perfection in every case, right? That I don't think anyone really believes that. That's not what I'm saying. So you're right. So the squirrel that is hypersensitive to noises in bushes, there might be a fair number of false negatives, or false positives, I should say, where they think that there's some predator in the bush and so they run up the tree, right? But evolution would also be pushing that squirrel to get increasingly good at minimizing false positives and false negatives. And so over time, the squirrel will get theoretically better and better and better at distinguishing between, oh, the wind is just making the bush rustle versus a fox is making the bush rustle. So just because the fox, or just because it isn't perfect in the squirrel, doesn't mean that it isn't moving in that direction, or that there isn't, in some sense, objective morality. I mean, is a squirrel deciding to run up a tree a moral decision, or would you say
Nope.
that no? I mean, it's kind of right. I mean, it's treating itself morally, right? The squirrel's deciding that its own survival is a good thing. That's at least a moral treatment of your own self, which self-immolation is different than, right? And so I do feel like there is something of that action that is a moral decision on behalf of the squirrel to say its own existence is a good thing and to preserve its own existence.
I don't think so. I don't think
Well,
morality
you could
is.
imagine a squirrel, a suicidal squirrel, that uses that same ability to distinguish between a bush rustling because of the wind or a bush rustling because of the fox, and try and seek out a bush that has a fox in it so they can get eaten by the fox, right?
Yep.
And that, I feel like, is a moral decision that is not a very good one in terms of evolutionary success over the long run.
I
So
still don't
there's
think that would be.
the same truth, right? Does that bush have a fox in it or just the wind in it, right? That's a truth question. And then
Yeah.
the moral question is what to do about that. And one option is run straight towards the bush to get eaten by the fox. The other option is climb the tree so that the fox won't get you, right? And so I feel like there is a inherently moral inclination inside the squirrel for self-preservation. That is a moral statement about the universe, that it is good to exist in this universe. And so even squirrels believe that the universe is good, because the squirrels that believe that the universe is bad voluntarily jump in foxes' mouths. And we don't have too many squirrels like that because they didn't have very many babies. But we have a lot of squirrels that believe that the preservation of squirrel kind is a good thing, and run up trees when they see or hear foxes.
Well,
And
do
sometimes
bacteria
they go ahead.
do bacteria and plants and viruses believe the world is good?
In a certain sense, yes. In a certain sense, everything that seeks out its own self-preservation is saying that existence is better than non-existence in this universe. And that's sort of my whole point, is that that urge is something that evolution cannot help but select for in virtually every life form, what have you. And that is something that is, because I mean, that was the question that we brought up earlier. If we think this is a bad show, then why not just get some gasoline and some matches? It's the same question as why should the squirrel run away from the fox?
Well, I understand your connection between the two questions, but I don't see morality as relevant to either of those. I think that like morality is more of a question of a conscious agent and trying to make a decision about something. I don't think
Do you think
bacteria.
squirrels aren't conscious? I would say a
Well,
squirrel
no,
is a
this is
conscious
why I went
agent.
to the bacteria example.
Okay.
Bacteria are not conscious. So simply the fact that you are prioritizing survivability
But
has nothing to do.
I would say a bacteria is an agent. I would agree with you that they are nowhere near. I would say that a bacteria is not conscious, and a squirrel is conscious, but they don't have quite the same level of consciousness that a human does. So somewhere, don't ask me to draw the line exactly where jellyfish, I don't know, like somewhere along the chain of being, consciousness happens. But a bacteria is an agent, and I would define an agent as something that can take inputs from its environment, process it through some sort of decision-making ability, and then generate actions from it. And I think that bacteria do that all the time, that they respond to their environment with various actions that are within their ability to enact.
I agree they respond to their environment, but I'm saying there's a difference between responding to your environment and morality. Those are two different things. So all interactions with your environment are interactions with the environment, but not all moral actions are interactions with the environment. So like all roses are flowers, but not all flowers are roses. And so I agree
What's an
morality is out there.
example of a moral decision that isn't an interaction with your environment?
No. All roses are flowers, but not all flowers are roses. Flowers is the interactions with reality. Roses is the morality. So obviously, all flowers are roses, or all roses are flowers, but not all flowers are roses. So in this context, the bacteria doing things for its survivability would be an interaction with reality, but it would not be a moral one. There are moral interactions in reality. There is some subset of objective interactions that are moral. That isn't one of them. And so of the kinds that are moral, they seem to be relevant to conscious agents that can make decisions and intellectually process morality in some way. Bacteria cannot do that. They are not doing anything moral when they pursue survivability. And so there must be a different category there between objective interactions in the world and morality. They are separate categories. And so I think that when we're asking what is the moral thing to do, it's a separate question than what is the best thing that we could do for our survival. They're totally separate questions. It'd be kind of like asking what is the best way for me to eat chocolate ice cream or something. This isn't a moral question. It's a pragmatic question, and it's the same way applies to.
That's where I sincerely disagree. Is I think that all questions that are related to our own survivability are the moral questions. I think what's unique about humans is, and this is different than squirrels. Squirrels are a little bit social, but they're not nearly as social of an animal as we are. Foxes are a little bit social. Wolves are even more social than foxes. Chimpanzees are even more social than wolves. But humans are by far the most social animal, especially in terms of the size of a group that we can interact with socially. And I think that this was one of humanity's niches that helped it evolve, is that we basically evolved the ability to have larger and larger groups. And I really like the work of the evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson, who talks about group selection, that I think that really one of the best ways to make sense of humanity is that we were competing groups that had neighboring human groups all around us, and that this was the case for millions of years, and that our groups got better and better and better at being the sort of group that could survive. And a lot of that has to, strangely enough, be with being a very selfless, other-focused person who can be a very generous and contributive member of your own group. And I think that's really one of the main ways to make sense of humans. And so when we talk about morality as humans, we're often talking about interpersonal morality, right? How to treat others, how our actions interact with the consequences to other people. Whereas squirrels kind of, they take care of their kids, they find mates, but they don't really do things in groups that much. But I think for humans, there is both kind of individual morality, like, me eating breakfast in the morning is a moral decision that I want to keep nourishing my body so that I can survive, right? But also, I'm going to, pour some cereal in the bowl for my children so that they have some cereal too, even though I could have eaten that cereal, right? There's the selfish self-preservation morality and group morality and family. Groups are complicated. There's family, there's neighborhood, there's, tribes, and, all those sorts of things. But I feel like what I'm saying is that evolution is being tugged upon by what will optimally work for your whatever sort of species you are. There's sort of a ideal form of that species that evolution is tugging you towards. That's what fitness is conformity to the best possible version of what that species could be. And humans is a very social species that is being tugged in terms of being both a good member but a good individual of a group.
Well, so like take the example of X-rays or infrared. We can't see those. And so even though they're there, evolution doesn't select for that. And there are many things in the world that are weakly interactive and have limited effect on our survivability. And so imagine morality is like that. It's a law of physics, kind of like X-rays, or that's just beyond that, where we can barely interact with it. In this case, evolution is going to prioritize non-moral things, survivability, murder, whatever, because those are more beneficial or more directly interactive with how we can survive. And even though morality is there, because it's only weakly interactive, even if it's objectively true, evolution would not select for morality. It would select for these other things that are not moral things. And so if this is the case, then there clearly must necessarily be a difference between morality and survivability, right?
I actually disagree with that. I think that morality is survivability and survivability is morality.
Why?
Because that is what is being tugged into us from the evolutionary process to get us to embody. That's why does one group outcompete another group, is because it's more moral. And that's what morality is. Like, the only reason why we can say this thing is more moral than
Just
some
clarify,
other thing.
was Genghis Khan more moral than the people
So
he
this is a
conquered?
good question. All right. So who had a larger impact on the world, Genghis Khan or Jesus? Right. Jesus had no children, right? Never married, never reproduced. Genghis Khan, you're right, probably the human who has generated the most offsprings in history. So who had a larger impact on our world?
Well, before we ask that, I want to ask, who is more moral, Genghis Khan or his victims?
Probably his victims.
But he had more survivability than they did.
But there's a complicated thing of what do we mean by survive, right? Individual cases, I'm not saying good wins every time, right? It's sort of on the whole, on average, good has a higher probability of winning, but it doesn't win every time, right? It's like, in the Super Bowl, most of the time the best team wins, but sometimes the not best team wins. But like over large numbers of Super Bowls, on average, the better team wins. And this was similar to what I was saying earlier, that evolution most of the time veers in the direction of good, but it's not perfect, right? So Genghis Khan spread a lot of his genes, but did he spread a lot of his culture, right? Because humans are a little bit complicated, that humans are a mix of genes and culture in terms of our behavior, right? And there's weird interactions between the two. And so I would say that Genghis Khan, even though he spread a lot of his genes, I'm not sure how much of his behavior was in his genes versus how much of his behavior was his own personal culture and circumstance and stuff like that, and just the opportunities of history that were possible at that particular moment in time. And so I feel like Jesus was more evolutionarily successful than Genghis Khan, despite having 0 children, because he had a much larger impact on the course of history and the behavior of individual people going forward than Genghis Khan did, even though Genghis Khan had however many thousands of kids.
Well, as an aside, I would probably disagree. I think Jesus had about as much impact on the modern American Christian as Genghis Khan had on the modern American or the modern Chinese person. So I think that's
No, I don't think that's true. I would
you like.
strongly disagree with
Have
that.
you
But
heard of the GOP Jesus? GOP
what do you
Jesus
mean?
is it's a hilarious video on YouTube that if we contrast the way Christians act today with how Jesus acted. Jesus was a brown communist immigrant Jew.
Communist, it depends what you mean.
Well, he was pro giving to charity, pro helping the poor, that kind of thing. The exact opposite of what most Republicans in America are for. They're
Well,
not for that.
I think that everyone in the West, American Republicans, American Democrats, American independents, American I don't care about politics are way more impacted by Jesus than by Genghis Khan. All of them. I think that our culture is so deeply saturated in Christian morality that it's hard to overstate. And that, okay, Republicans do a little bit of this, Democrats do a little bit of this. They're both arguing under deeply moral assumptions. And, reference Tom Holland in his book Dominion. I think that our culture is so deeply saturated in Christian ethics, which come directly from Jesus, that it would be hard to overstate that. And our ethics are not very directly influenced by Genghis Khan. The decisions even that many atheists make on a daily basis are way more impacted by Jesus than by Genghis Khan.
Well, I just don't see that as factually true. It seems like all of the morals of the Bible were just stolen from pre-existing morals in other religions. I don't think there's anything unique to the Bible whatsoever. Same with Genghis Khan. Like his moral system was also taken from other moral systems of the time period, which were then developed into systems after that, which systems after that, which systems after that, which led to today. And so I don't see any difference whatsoever in those. But that's an aside. That's a different topic. I wanted to go back to how you're tying in survivability to morality. So let's say there's an objective morality in the universe. It is a thing. And this thing could be a multiplicity of occupy different spaces in the universe. It could be maybe a law of physics, platonic object, God, whatever. It could be survivability, and it could be something else that's completely different from survivability. Why do you think it's survivability as opposed to being like an undiscovered law of physics or something? Why tie survivability to morality as opposed to, okay, I'll just give you a minute.
Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. And anyway, almost got an interruption. It's okay. So, I mean, what would objective morality be? What would make it objective if it didn't have any interaction with the world, right? How would we know about it? Well, how would we know it if it existed, if it's completely independent of the world? What I'm saying is that I'm
just to clarify, it doesn't matter whether or not
I'm
we know
giving
about
a definition of what morality is, and that it is survivability. And that
the question
it
is
connects
why?
to the world. Well, I mean, I feel like I could just define it that way. That's almost just like an axiom in terms of what I'm saying, is that morality is the system of behavior for, and I could make it specific for humans. Squirrel morality might be slightly different, but human morality is the behavior of individuals and groups collectively that would be the best survivable. Definition, basically. And I don't know what your definition of morality is or how we would get at it or how we would approach it. I mean, my definition of morality then interacts with the world, and we would theoretically see through the process of evolution more moral groups and more moral individuals slowly and slowly over time outcompeting the less ones, and that would cause the course of human history to go in the direction of morality.
Okay.
Not perfectly, not every example, right? There will be World War IIs, there will be Hitlers, but noticeably Hitler lost, so that sort of thing. It's not, it's a bumpy road, but it's the direction of the road. I suppose I'm in some way just saying the arc of history bends towards justice, but sometimes it takes a long way to get there.
Well, I mean, the British Empire kind of won, and so did America. I wouldn't consider them moral.
Well, I think that they were many ways more moral than what came before them. I think that the British Empire.
Also, like, take Jainism. Jainism is the most moral of all the religions. It has never won. Never in the history of humanity has it ever won. It's a small minority.
What do you think? I know what Jainism is. What do you think? I mean, isn't a lot of Hinduism still today influenced by Jainism? And isn't that, aren't there about 1 billion people kind of in that direction? So I wouldn't say it's, there are a billion-ish Hindus on planet Earth, and is probably one of the fastest growing religions. And so I would
Jainism is
say,
a small subset of Hinduism. Hinduism is
yeah,
a
but
collection
there's a
of
lot of Jainism in broader Hinduism, being nice to animals, that sort of thing.
yeah, some, but yes, Jainism today, Jainism has always been the most moral religion. And if your hypothesis was correct, Jainism should have conquered the world.
But
Christianity should not.
what makes you judge it as moral, right? And I'm saying, okay, if it didn't spread far enough, then maybe it wasn't quite as moral as you think.
The lack of like the principle that you're not supposed to harm any conscious agent for any reason. That's morality. That's what I believe morality is fundamentally. And so I think
Why?
Christianity, well, my model says that there is objective morality and it does interact with us. It's weakly interactive and it leads towards a particular principle that is in the involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And so I think that's the moral principle. But I think that Jainism is the most moral position, and I think drowning babies in Christianity is immoral. I think turning people to salt, sending bears to kill young adults for making fun of a bald guy is immoral. I think God sending people to hell is immoral. Seems like the Christian God did a whole lot of immoral things, and the Jains are significantly more moral individuals than anything in Christianity. But Christianity has a sword, and swords tend to be propagated at a higher rate than non-swords. And so the combination of the sword propagation in addition to social benefit seems to be what led Christianity to be so popular, not its relation to morality. And that's why I think morality is not tied into evolution, because it seems the people who are the most moral do not succeed. It's the people who are the most
But yeah,
pragmatic
we're
with the
getting back
sword.
to, you think the whole show is bad.
The whole
Because
show.
if evolution doesn't lead us in the direction of morality, then evolution
Well, I think it does. So
either
I
more.
do.
So you do agree with me?
Yeah, I think over time that as like any weakly interactive force, as we
So there is a positive correlation between
yes.
morality and survival success.
Yes, I believe there is. I was trying to show that that's not really important to the argument, but yes, I do believe there is.
Whereas I think that's the crux of the whole argument, and I'll say crux with a double meaning, that I think that on the cross is the perfect example of morality. Paradoxically, you might not think that a celibate human without any children voluntarily submitting to death on the cross is the thing that would redeem the whole universe, but I think that is exactly what happened.
And do you think we should all sacrifice ourselves without having children on a cross? And you think that would be evolutionary advantageous?
A weird thing that happened in early Christianity, because early Christianity had a weird habit of outcompeting paganism in its day, even though it was more common in even early Christianity than sort of even modern Catholicism or Orthodoxy for people to be celibate their whole lives. Early Christianity really valorized celibacy and virginity, kind of following after Jesus's example. But yet Christianity had a weird way of even out reproducing paganism. And a lot of that was because of its sexual ethic of restraining sex to marriage and procreation and not aborting or practicing infanticide. And so in a weird sort of way, celebrating a human who was celibate ended up being more reproductively successful than various forms of paganism, which had a sexual ethic of do what you can and do what you please, more or less.
So we should not sacrifice ourselves on the cross without having children?
I think that it is the high point that we're supposed to live up to, but there is a way in which most people won't live up to it, and that reproduction is still good, even though we won't always perfectly embody that. But even a parent sacrificing themselves and their money and their time and their energy for their kids is a reflection of that same principle. And so Jesus is like that principle at the absolute perfected maximum. And our participation
But if we
in that
did the
principle,
maximum, like if we all did the maximum, what would happen? Would that be evolutionary advantageous?
yes, in a
What?
weird sort of way. In a weird sort of way, it is the process that causes the imitation of that principle that seems paradoxically successful, but it is. I mean, what else is Christianity besides that? That is Christianity's highest example. So why did it outcompete paganism? Why is it that even in this day, those darn Trump Republicans who go to church very frequently have more kids than the atheists? There's still something going on. And I
People
think it
believe
is the,
delusions. That's why people are attracted to
well,
delusional ideas.
how delusional can an idea be if it grants you success? That's my point again.
Talking donkeys, talking snakes, turning people to salt. It's pretty delusional. The
Is
fact
it?
that, yes, extremely, but
So then why does it generate more children?
because people are motivated by delusions. So being motivated by delusions to do things is an
So
effective way to cause action. It's
so
evolution.
then
Cleansing is evolutionary argument.
which delusions are more successful than others? And doesn't that say something about there's a evolutionary hierarchy of delusions? You could be deluded into
Sure.
thinking that we should all just drink Kool-Aid to join the UFO that's behind the moon. That won't be very long-term successful. Or you could be deluded into thinking that the universe is the sort of place where a woman talked to a snake, ate a fruit she shouldn't have ate, made her husband eat that fruit, and therefore we needed a person to die on a cross so that we could drink his blood and eat his body. But yet somehow that second one seems to generate a much different culture and a much different behavior in people that is self-propagating over time that nothing else has been able to beat it. So what does that say about that if there's this hierarchy of delusions in their evolutionary success? Shouldn't we, or wouldn't you expect the one that is the most successful to become more and more believed over time? And how could that be the case unless it were true?
So like
If
there are
there's a
many examples of,
correlation between survivability and morality, these delusions, as you're saying, I'm using your word. Obviously, I think delusion is not quite the right word. But if it comes slowly and more into being over time, that's speaking something about this moral realm that we both have agreed exists and that is tugging on us.
so two things there. One, I think Christianity is going to be replaced by a better ideology in future, and it already is being replaced by better ideologies. But more
It's still
importantly,
growing.
no, no,
What ideology
wait.
will
That's a different
replace
topic.
it?
Different topic. One
All right.
second. So I want to
Okay.
go
No,
back to.
I'm curious about that.
I want to
But
go back to
go
what
ahead.
you said about how can it be selected for if it's not true. This is like Jordan Peterson truth. You know, have you heard of Jordan Peterson's
I've heard of Jordan
definition
Peterson.
of
Yeah.
truth? And he had a conversation with Brett Weinstein, I believe his name was, and they
Mhm.
were talking about how people can have beliefs that are completely wrong, but it's advantageous for survivability. And if you define truth based off of what is advantageous to survivability, you lose the meaning of truth, because there are things that are true that have no advantage survivability to know, none whatsoever. Like Galileo believing that the world is round. That was definitely not advantageous for truth or for survivability at the time.
Although it is now, right? Because getting on an airplane under the assumption that the world is round could help you do various economic beneficial things. So,
Right. But not all
um,
truths are. Like, simply, if we just list all facts that are true, knowing
I
all of these
generally
facts
agree
would
with
not
you.
be.
Yeah.
Well, so this means that the fact that something can be evolutionary advantageous does not have a necessarily correlate to it being true, morally or factually. And so I don't understand why you keep making this assumption that just because it was evolutionary advantageous in the past, that means it was true, because it could be an intermediate step. It was better than the thing before it, but worse than the thing after it. So there's no reason to believe it's true. It may be.
For the record, I could agree. I agree with what you said, that there could be intermediate steps where something could be an improvement, but not necessarily perfection, right?
Right.
That's something that I agree with in terms of the evolutionary process. But another thing that I said, and this is sort of like a fact value distinction, sort of like a David Humean thing. Maybe you don't like the distinction, maybe you do, but that's sort of like what I was saying about the squirrel. All right, so is there a fox in the bush? That's a factual question, right? Should I run up the tree or should I run into the fox's mouth is the moral decision. What to do about the fact is the moral decision. So I agree with you that there are factual truths that are independent of morality, right? There's sort of, I don't know, basically all of factual truth out there. And I'm not the sort of person that can know all of factual truth, but it's helpful for me to both know factual truth and have the morality that responds to factual truth in the way that is most beneficial towards survivability. And so it's that sort of second layer, right? That how should I act in response to moral truth as an agent who's, inside the evolutionary paradigm? That is what I'm saying the morality is. And that learning to have the better and better and better and better morality is, I feel like, just by definition happening.
So if we get AI and AI becomes conscious and it says atheism is true and it all becomes atheist and the world converts from Christianity to atheism, would that be a defeater for your worldview where the most evolutionary advantageous, morally true position would be atheism, not Christianity?
Well, I feel like AI is its own separate question. I feel like I could talk about AI, but I feel like your question in general, if atheism starts spreading and it were more evolutionarily successful, would that then support the case for atheism? I would say yes, that would be in line with what I'm saying. AI, I feel like, is related, but not necessarily an integral part of that question. But my point is that I feel like atheism, I feel like Richard Dawkins was right about mind viruses. I saw Richard Dawkins and Brett Weinstein talk one time. They were in Chicago. That was actually a very interesting talk. The video of it was kind of bungled, but I saw it live in person, so I was thankful for that. But and they were talking about this sort of metaphorical versus practical truth. So I know that distinction that you're trying to make. But I feel like Richard Dawkins got the mind virus wrong. I feel like atheism is the mind virus because it leads to behavior that isn't as reproductively as effective as Christianity, so that it's somewhat parasitic off of Christianity's success. I feel like Christianity's success more or less built Western and also much of Eastern and Middle Eastern civilization, and that atheism is some sort of weird, I got here because a majority of my ancestors were Christian, but I'm going to turn against it. And if it means I have to buy some gasoline and some matches, so be it. But how could Christianity lose to gasoline and matches if we keep having kids?
Technology. So presumably the ideology that gives you the most technology will give you eternal life eventually, or the longest lifespan. And at that point, doesn't matter how many kids you have, we're going to outlast you, and have more of us are going to grow at a much higher rate.
But technology also needs morality to decide how it's used. You can use an atomic
Right.
bomb
That's
to blow
the
up
argument.
a city. You can use an atomic reaction in a power plant to give electricity to a whole city.
Right. The argument, remember, is that
to do is the morality.
I'm including that. So the argument here is that the atheist worldview has the most development of technology, and with their morality, they will take over by becoming immortal through use of technology and overtake the Christian ideology, and then replace the Christian ideology with the atheist ideology because they have a technological advantage, can survive more, have better survivability, longer life expectancy, can do more to interact with physics, save lives, et cetera, and based on your argument, that would then imply that their morality is correct because they are the most survivable.
So let me say, I might not accept one of your premises, but I'll go with that for now, saying that Christians and atheists would have different success rates at science. I've published lots of scientific papers myself. I don't see any reason why a Christian can't be as good, if not better in some ways, because of the sort of more inherent motivating force that Christianity gives people. Whether you think this motivating force is the delusions of apples, crosses, and Eucharists, I feel like you kind of have conceded that there is something more inherently motivating about Christianity than its absence. Maybe you would disagree with that. So I feel like science is both truth-seeking, but it's also the motivation that truth-seeking is a good thing. And I feel like Christianity has that in it. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Christianity is the truth-seeking, hyper-motivator thing. And I think it's no accident that the scientific revolutions happened within Christendom. And I still think that I will accept the challenge over the long run of whether atheists or Christians do better science. And I think that, again, most atheists are still probably kind of a lot more Christian than they really realize or admit. So it's kind of a blurry boundary between atheism and Christianity in the West, I'll say. But let's imagine the case that, let's say that atheists are 10% better on average.
Well, I think the argument I'm making is more specifically, as we become more scientifically literate, we become less Christian. So people, as we look up in the more scientific literally any society becomes, the less religious, the less Christian. The people in the National Academy of Science, the Royal Society, are the least religious people. And so that's the claim I'm making here, is that the atheist worldview, which adopts
that increasing scientific awareness leads to increasing amounts of atheism.
Yeah.
And like you could say, I bet that you would be right that if we were to do an analysis of what percentage of people are atheist, self-identify as atheist versus self-identify as Christian, and we were to kind of look at scientific papers published or something along those lines as a correlation for, or patents generated or something along those lines, right? As some sort of intrinsic measure of scientific or technological productivity. Would there be a positive correlation? Perhaps. I think that that would be interesting. I would even bet that the correlation would be positive with atheism and scientific papers published or whatever metric we chose. But then there's a weird problem that that'll generate, is that if atheism, which seems to lead to fewer children, right? I think that that's certainly true in America and Europe, that if we look at number of children per household and how often you go to church, right, or something like that, that is reproduction is positively correlated with going to church. And let's say that scientific output is negatively correlated with going to church and negatively correlated with children. Part of that might be it's hard to have as big of a family if you're a scientist. That might be one inherently tricky thing. And so scientists are almost like a priestly class where they sacrifice some reproductive success of their own for benefiting the group. That's sort of how I would define a priestly class. But if that's true, then Western civilization, as it gets more and more scientifically advanced and more technologically, what have you, will go into a birth decline, right? And will slowly start to get less and less numerous. And, like wars are interesting because, technology is important, but manpower is also important, right? We're sort of seeing the balance of those two things in Russia and Ukraine at the moment. So that would seem to suggest that scientific productivity might not be as evolutionary beneficial. But what I think will happen actually is that over time in a scientifically advanced society, the reproductive Christian scientists, and I don't mean Christian scientists as in the sect called Christian Science, I mean scientists who happen to be Christian, will out-reproduce the atheistic scientists. And even among scientists, over decades and decades of this environment, scientists will become increasingly Christian because they have both the positive motivation for science and the positive motivation for family rearing.
I think the opposite is going to happen. I think I agree that the birth rate is going to go down, but I think that's not the only relevant evolutionary factor. I think longevity is the more important factor. I think if you can increase the amount that you live, that is probably like the end goal evolution is to not die. That is, you don't need to reproduce if you never die. That's going to be the solution. And so I think
there's still something beneficial about reproduction because it generates newness, right? One bad thing about a person living forever and not having kids, and I think this is honestly why evolution has death and rebirth in it, right? Which is, there's something symbolically resonant about the crucifixion even in that, but is that death and reproduction is what generates the newness. And it would just be static. There wouldn't be new updating if people just got to maturity and live forever, because people past the age of 50 or 60 don't change very much in terms of what they believe or how they behave. You sort of reach a stasis, right? The younger you are, the faster you're changing. And so I feel like part of the purpose of death and rebirth is to generate the newness, and that newness is required for evolution to select among the newness for what's the improvement and not.
Well, I think that's definitely false. So I think that the reason evolution has newness is because of entropy, and it can't keep the organism alive perpetually forever. I think the reason that we don't change when we're 50 is, again, because of the allocation of resources. But
I don't think that that's
the best
true at all.
evolutionary...
I think a lot of animals, there's a trade-off between animals in terms of how long their lifespans is. I feel like it would be possible to have an 80-year-old mouse. I don't think that there's anything physically making that impossible. Some turtles, live for over 100 years, right? And so I think that there is a trade-off between how fast you can adapt and how long the generation cycles are.
Well, no, I'd say that the animal that can perpetually learn and perpetually live would be the most evolutionary advantageous. Like if humans could live forever and continue to gain knowledge and didn't plateau motivationally to stop learning, that would be a better evolutionarily advantaged organism than what we are. And so, like, if I was 1,000 years old, I would be a billionaire because I would have invested in stocks. I would have had like know everything about the economy. I know how to manipulate everybody to do what I want. There would be a huge evolutionary advantage to being alive and being able to continually think. And so that's definitely going to be something that it's not specifically the newness isn't what evolution is going for there.
But well, there's still newness coming into individuals, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
In terms
the
of
form of
knowledge,
ideas,
behavior, improvement, right? Inside so the body or perhaps the brain and the identity is persevering through time, but there's still individual adaptation.
Yep.
I actually think that you're probably right about that. And so my point would be that that's exactly what Christianity says will happen, is that perfected human beings will be resurrected in the image of Jesus Christ, who is the perfect human being, who both is capable of being eternal and capable of being open to change. There are actually a lot of church fathers that talk about how even in the sort of eschaton, humans will continue learning and continue to grow deeper and deeper into God, even though they're immortal at the same time. And so I feel like you're pointing to what Christians have viewed the eschaton, or the age to come, or post-resurrection humanity to be for a long time. So yes, I think you're right.
But we would typically agree that whichever society gets us to the transhuman level of immortality is the better one evolutionarily, from an evolutionary perspective. And I think that's not going to be the Christian one. I don't think there's any magic soul stuff there. It's probably going to be science that does that one.
Well, who says that Christians and science can't, like, what? I reject that dichotomy. I
think it's necessarily the case that as scientific literacy increases, Christianity and all religions will necessarily decrease. So if we're at the stage where our 8-year-olds are as smart as the people of the Royal Society, religion's done. It's gone. Like if we're probably going to get the same proportional percentage of religious people once you get to that intellectual level, and if that intellectual level is our kids, about 8 years old, or adults, 0% are going to be religious. It's going to be not a thing anymore.
So what will motivate them to keep staying alive?
They like it, fun, dopamine.
Wouldn't you have to think that the world was a good place to want to be the sort of person who would live forever in it and keep learning about it? So wouldn't you have to think, well, why? If you think the show is bad, why do you want to live forever in it? Eventually, you're going to come to you're going to pick the gasoline and matches option.
Well, no, like you can like bad things. Like people like bad things all the time. I play Dead Space. You can like horror shows just fine. What people like isn't contingent on goodness or badness. And so I don't see.
Again, I disagree with that, but I've already sort of made that point.
Sure. So, but anyway, you don't need to see the world as good to continue living. And I think
wanting to continue to live is inherently affirming the goodness of your own life and the universe.
But I think most atheists do think it's good to live. I don't know exactly what you're meaning by you think the whole shebang is bad or something. I think if God existed, the whole shebang would be bad. That would be bad. God existing would be bad. I don't think just the universe existing would be the same kind of whole shebang badness. So I think that's like a disconnect between the arguments there, is that the whole shebang badness I was talking about was if God existed, if the Christian God existed, the whole shebang is bad. That is bad. If the Christian God doesn't exist and we're atheists, well, now it's not a problem anymore.
And so I'm sort of kind of flipping that upside down, that to think that the universe is the sort of place where it's good to live in it and good to live forever is affirming the goodness of the whole show, or the cosmos, or whatever you want to call it. And then that will inevitably bring up the questions of, okay, so what sort of beliefs are the ones that are inherently motivating to live within it? And I think that you'll end up reverse engineering Christianity again as the solution that says the universe is good. Here's your role in it. Here's what you're supposed to do. Here's why learning is good. Here's why truth is good. Here's the purpose of being a human being. Here's why you were created. All right. You also need to be self-sacrificial and treat other people with love. And then all of a sudden, okay, wait a minute, we're Christian again, right? The sort of thing that will most motivate people to be the sort of people that you want and that you imagine will live forever, I would say that's Christianity.
I don't think it has anything to do with personal motivation like that. I think that the ultimate survivability metric is going to be when we can modify physics to make it so that we all get our own universe and we can do whatever we want with it, essentially. And it doesn't matter if you're self-sacrifice or not. Self-sacrifice is going to be irrelevant at that point. What matters is can we stop physics from killing us? And the ideology that gets us to that first is going to be the one that's the most evolutionary advantageous. And simply helping other people is a means to keep them alive to get to that point, but it has nothing to do with the keeping other people alive part. It's not the intrinsically valuable aspects from an evolutionary perspective. It's the helping us get to the point where we don't die anymore. And so once we get to that point,
yeah. I have to say, I have to get going in a couple minutes, but
sure.
I see your point. I would encourage you to just continue to go in that direction. And I think that's exactly what I'm saying, is that the sort of worldview that leads to human beings living forever in perfect moral and scientific and, wisdom perfection is exactly what Christianity is saying is the whole show. If there's some super chats or something, maybe I have 5 more minutes.
All right, cool. There's one from Harry. Same thing. David Sinclair is working on a 10 years younger pill. It works on rats. What happens when there is no more natural death? Same topic we were just talking about.
Yeah, I would say that's the kingdom of God. That's what I mean when there's no more natural death.
Gotcha. I'm on the wrong section. Jacob McKinsey, thank you for the super chat. He's rewriting the Bible in the perspective of my chair as a joke. So it's a quote from that, which is pretty cool. Benjamin Thomas Blodgett asked, do you want to believe things that are true or things that are easier to believe and lead people to teach their kids those things regardless of their validity?
False distinction. I think that teaching kids things and having kids be able to understand it and having it shape kids into the sort of wonderful human beings that we want them to become is suggesting that those things are true. I read my kids 2 Bible stories from their children's Bible every night, and I think that I'm doing absolutely the best thing I can because it's true.
Hope it's not 2 Kings 2:24. Good question says, in atheism we just are, in Christianity Sam is a sinning, rotting piece of garbage that Jesus had to save. Who thinks life is bad?
I would say another thing that I didn't quite totally mention about Unitarian Christianity is I would say it has a higher view of humanity than some other forms of Christianity. Like that humanity being a stinking, rotten piece of garbage. I would say certain forms of Calvinism and other kinds of Christianity seem to affirm that. But Unitarian Christianity, almost in all of its manifestations, has a much higher view of the human being than that. And that's because we think that Jesus was a human being and that he was good and perfect too. And so we would, like Martin Luther said, that humanity is like snow on the outside of a turd or something like that, right? We look on the outside, but we're like got, just rotting crap on the inside. I think that Unitarian would say the opposite, that there's some sin on the outside, but deep on the inside, we're good, and that God made us to be good and that we have that potential to be good. So I don't think that human beings are rotten garbage.
Gotcha. I think, but you do believe in sin, right? So you believe sin is a part of humanity, which if we start at human as like some kind of a neutral level, like where atheism is, and then you add sin, which is like a degradation, I think that's the argument. So from your perspective, wouldn't yours be the one that is seeing humanity as less than?
Well, I would say that humans sinning is when we deviate from our evolutionary oriented perfection, right? Genghis Khan killing a bunch of people, that was pretty sinful. And that was a deviation from what he was supposed to have been doing, right? But human beings, when we aren't sinning, that's the same thing as us being the sort of thing that could live forever. And that's our destiny.
All right. Get Stanfield, how could you begin to even test a God? What would be the method of ascertaining his or her existence? Where would you even start?
I'm not really sure that I have an answer for that, or that God even is testable in that sort of sense. I think that, I've been sort of repeating the phrase, the whole show, or that sort of thing. I think that we all agree that there is a whole show. It's the question of, is it good, neutral, bad? And what is that whole show like, right? So I think that in some sense, we all believe in God. We just disagree about what God is like, if God is a person, if God is good, etc. So I'm not entirely sure if one could ascertain the existence of God in that way. What I'm saying is our beliefs about the whole show affect our actions, and the actions that best survive over time reveal the truth of the matter.
Gotcha. That's it for the super chats. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
I have a YouTube channel called Transfigured. I talk a lot about Christology and stuff like that. Probably not all of my videos would be interesting to this audience, but some are with scientists. I talked with David Sloan Wilson, that evolutionary biologist that I mentioned. So that would be where you could find out more about me.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks. Sorry. The comment suggested I interrupted more than I maybe should have, but so I apologize if that was the case.
That's fine. I appreciate it because I've had a really sore throat, so getting a break is helpful.
Well, I appreciate it, Tom. And I actually do like your channel. I like what you're up to. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks so much.